It's a great pleasure to be here, and I wanted to talk a little bit about a topic that we don't often reflect on consciously, and that's time. Because when I was in the middle of my burnout, I was caught up in what I now know were deeply irrational beliefs about time. In fact, now I think about it as a form of time madness. And I see the same distorted beliefs, feelings about time, and extremely irrational time usage patterns in many of my coaching clients. Um, and today I really just want to look at burnout from a slightly different perspective and argue that unhelpful time beliefs are a central feature of burnout. And we do need to change our attitude to time when we want to recover from it. Um, and just to be really clear about definitions, so there is, of course, a form of burnout that is caused by external factors, by too many demands on us, and too few resources. A chronic imbalance between demands and resources, which causes chronic stress, which can lead to chronic burnout. And of course, burnout is a multifactorial phenomenon. It can have many causes such as perfectionism, but also, structural, organizational issues, a very loud inner critic. And I also do think that, our technological landscape has a lot to do with the fact that burnout rates are so high because tech bleeds into our lives on a regular basis now and blurs the boundaries between work and leisure time in a way that we've never seen before, historically speaking. But I do want to focus on time specifically today. Um, so many of us do tend to think of time as an enemy. We may feel tyrannized by deadlines and endless to-do lists. We may feel overwhelmed and behind. We may feel that we're always late, always racing to catch up. Many of us feel that the day doesn't seem to have enough hours to get through our task lists. And we may regularly work very long into the evening just to catch up and regain a sense of control. Sometimes others may dictate our schedules, and we are completely lacking autonomy of our time, which in itself is a risk factor for burnout when we feel we are very externally determined at the mercy of bosses who may not be kind about our time allocations. And that can be a very scary experience. But at other times, we may be our own cruel masters, and our time pressures may arise from within ourselves. Most of us, I think, find ourselves in a situation where both are true. And I love this illustration that you see on the slide here by Liz Foslian, a fabulous illustrator, because it really shows, it captures in a nutshell what we do when we slip into burnout mode. When we think that time is scarce and that we don't have enough of it, we tend to cancel breaks, lunch with friends, skip exercise, and refuse ourselves any rest. I certainly did that when I was in burnout mode. I just cut everything out of my life apart from work. And we often feel guilty and ashamed about our behindness. And we feel that we should dedicate every single minute of the day to work. And yet, because we are so exhausted already, we can't really work. We often just sit in front of our screens, waste hours online, and we live in this gray zone where we are neither working nor resting. So I certainly languished in front of my screen. I was unable to work properly. And at the same time, I wasn't allowing myself to rest and recover and do good things, nourishing things for myself either. Um, and that is, of course, the perfect recipe for burnout. Energy drains out, so we spend our energy by trying to work, but nothing comes back in. And in that way, we end up with an ever-growing energy deficit because attempting to work costs us energy. In fact, if ever more, the more exhausted we are. And we have cut every single energy replenishing activity out of our life. So you can see the energy deficit scenario there. And in that state, we often push ourselves to work every minute of the day. We feel like we're so behind, we're so stressed about that. We must work all the time, even when we're actually too exhausted to work and have become completely inefficient at working. In that state, our nervous systems are dysregulated, our focus is impaired, we can't concentrate, we can't problem solve, we can't think creatively, and everything takes really long. It's because we are completely cut off from our own resources, and still we don't allow ourselves to take breaks. And that may sound very banal, but believe me, this is common sense, but uncommon practice. A lot of my burned out clients don't take breaks. They just don't ever stop. They don't allow themselves any time to replenish and re energize. Um, when we are in a state of burning out or burning on, we may also procrastinate on what truly matters. You may be familiar with the Eisenhower matrix, which you can see on this screen. Um, and another feature of burnout is that many of us spend our days in the urgent but unimportant or non urgent, non important zones. The important work, the deep, meaningful stuff, the stuff that may give us energy and replenish ourselves because it feels important and meaningful and it's satisfying, is neglected. We don't go there. And we don't go there because we can't, we don't go there because we aren't able to prioritize. That's what many people think, that this is a time management issue and that we don't have our priorities right. I think the reason we don't venture into that quadrant, into that important, non urgent quadrant, is because it's really high stakes. It is so important to us that we fear to go there. It is often tied up with our self esteem, our self image. And we fear to fail in that quadrant. We fear that we may fail at what is most important to us. And we also fear that we won't be able to tolerate that we will break, that our self-esteem will be so damaged by that we have to avoid it at all costs. So it is much safer to be armchair perfectionists and to dream of perfection, but never to get started on realizing our visions. So, and in both of these cases, the kind of endless work, the languishing, the never taking breaks, or the not ever getting started on what matters most to us are patterns that I see a lot in my clients, and they're patterns that I'm also very, very familiar with myself. And I would say that this sense of total overwhelm or paralyzing procrastination, when we're in that state, our time usage decisions become highly irrational. So we desperately try to use our time productively at all times, or else we squander it mercilessly. Um, and in both cases, we cut out all that nourishes us. So we aggravate the energy deficit. And of course, that deepens our depletion further. And the counterintuitive strategy to burnout is therefore not to cut activities from our lives, but to reintroduce what gives us joy and meaning and what makes us feel alive. And that does seem counterintuitive because when we feel behind and overwhelmed, the natural instinct is to cut, to abandon, to just let go of what doesn't seem important. But often we make very bad decisions about what we cut. So I always say the most important thing when we're in that burnt out state is to bring back activities that give us joy, that energize us, and that nourish us. And that can also include spending time in the important non-urgent quadrant of the Eisenhower matrix, i.e. the parts of our jobs, our professions that are meaningful to us. And I do quite like this quotation: work needs rest and rest takes work, because it is actually often very hard for many people to stop. And it takes a real commitment, and it requires a mindset shift as well. And I do think that our attitudes to time are very, very existential and they're very deep beliefs. They revolve around very deep beliefs around value and contribution and worth. And therefore, I do think that productivity hacks can't really solve what is essentially a philosophical and psychological problem. And I do want to briefly explore with you today how we might reframe our time beliefs. And first of all, I wanted to reassure you that you are not alone with these very common time struggles. And there is a reason why many of us struggle with time at this particular moment in history. I believe that our time troubles have very deep cultural roots. And I would like to very briefly explore some of these with you now. So the first one is what I call the gospel of work. It's one of the key reasons why many of us struggle to rest. So in brief, our 24/7 working and consumption patterns are relatively new phenomena in the history of our species, because in the past, seasons and the duration of specific tasks and the dying of the natural light determined our working patterns. But industrialization required a completely different attitude to work and time. And time management, punctuality, and efficiency became new virtues. Long, hard working hours had to be ideologically reinforced too. And in the 16th century, we saw the emergence of some theological ideas that gradually morphed into a gospel of work, a new work ethic that revolved around discipline, productivity, and success in the here and now. But what happened really was that in various different Puritan frameworks, success and worldly achievements were deemed to be a sign of being amongst the elect. They were deemed to be a clear signal that we are amongst those who are predestined for salvation in the afterlife. And because people couldn't know or influence whether they were chosen by God, they started to concentrate on manipulating the sign of being chosen instead, i.e., worldly success. So, worldly success wasn't just desirable in its own right, but it actually became a sign of salvation, and it became a way of manipulating our chances of salvation. And there was also a longer history of condemning laziness and inactivity as sins in religious texts. You may remember, for example, that sloth is one of the deadly 7 sins. And I believe that many of us have deeply internalized these old religious values and narratives around time and the, problematics of rest and the dangers of rest. And because we have internalized these values, many of us have become our own slave drivers, believing that we're nothing without success, we're worth nothing without success, and that we're worthless without our work. And another interesting phenomena is that we still tend to talk about time using morally charged economic metaphors. So, for example, we talk about losing time, wasting it, saving it, gaining it, and spending it. Sometimes we may squander or even kill time. And many of us hold the idea that time is money, as Benjamin Franklin famously put it. So we often feel a really extreme pressure to use our lifetime to work and achieve, because deep down we still believe that this is the only pathway to redemption. The next point I want to make is that we don't only suffer from a lack of free time, from a perceived or real lack of free time. We often also feel really disappointed about how we spend our free time. So think doom scrolling, binge watching, online shopping. We live in a work spend culture, and our resting activities are often not very restful because they revolve around passive consumption rather than connection or learning. And of course, smartphones are designed to be highly seductive, highly addictive, and they deliver the highly seductive wares of the attention economy directly into our pockets. They're extremely hard to resist, but they're not nourishing. They don't replenish us. And in that sense, we continue to languish, very time scarce and overworked, and we forever hunt dissatisfying distractions that do not really nourish us. And the final point I wanted to make about time is what I call the lost saved time paradox. So you are probably already using ChatGPT, and ChatGPT allows you to save numerous hours, maybe weeks, maybe months of work each day. Especially if you're a knowledge worker, you will use it to write, summarize, analyze at warp speed. And time-saving technologies have always promised us more freedom, historically speaking, more space for connection, rest, and creativity. But we are not logging off earlier, right? We don't sit in the garden now, mid-afternoon, with a glass of wine. We're still racing to keep up with ever faster rising demands. Maybe we're even working longer now because the tasks keep coming ever faster. So we are lost. We are in the middle of the lost save time paradox here, because each technological advance historically has promised us more time and more leisure. But the more time we save, the less we seem to have. So just as an example, email was supposed to shorten communication, but instead inbox management has now become a job in itself. Cars cut travel time, but because we all have cars, we commute ever longer to work. So it's quite standard to accept extremely long commutes just to get to work and back home. Vacuum cleaners have eased housework, but they have also raised cleanliness standards. And now AI completes tasks in seconds, but we aren't benefiting from the saved time. Why is that? I still believe that I believe that most of us deeply believe that saved time must be reinvested. It must be reinvested into the productivity machine. We are, after all, spiritual descendants of the Puritans, and saved time becomes yet another opportunity for productivity. We seem to be incapable of cashing in our time dividend and exchange it for more leisure. And the German sociologist Hartmut Rosa has argued that our age of acceleration is marked by frenetic standstill. What he means by that is that everything accelerates, but nothing fundamentally changes. So the deeper power structures persist, but our minds and bodies fray under the strain of the ever increasing speed of our devices. So we're desperately trying to keep up with the speed of our technologies. And I want to be clear that I'm not a Luddite. I use ChatGPT like everybody else, and it does save me some time and free me from annoying, time-consuming tasks. But I do care deeply about the politics and ethics of time usage. I do believe that time and attention are our most precious goods as human beings, and that both are under serious threat in our current climate. And how we spend our days is how we spend our lives. And I don't have the impression that most people's days look particularly good. And I do believe that the revolution that we need here will be philosophical, not technological. So I do believe that we need to change our attitude to time, that we need to allow ourselves breaks, rest, recovery periods, and that we have to do something at this point in time where we have a chance, because we do, in theory, have technology that saves us a lot of time. I do think we need to counter the logic of endless maximization, because that logic is burning us out. And I believe we are at a crossroads. We can keep accelerating, or we can stop and ask the most important question of all, which is, what is time well spent? And if the answer is to produce more, then we will continue to sacrifice health, meaning, and connection on the altar of speed. But if the answer is to live more, to care more, feel more, connect more, then our definition of success must shift. And I would just like to invite you at the end to imagine a society in which a good work-life balance is the new status symbol. And being stressed and exhausted is as frowned upon as smoking and drinking, because we know that the consequences for our health are basically the same. Where our lives are measured not by throughput, but by quality and depth of attention. So, what might happen if we became time rebels, maverick revolutionaries who dare to cash in their saved time and use it for pleasure, creativity, and connection rather than productivity? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Anna. Wow, so much to take in there. Armchair perfectionist. And I mean, just so absorbing. Don't want to leave on a doom and gloom note, but the production, what the choices we have, and that's going to come down to our leaders. I just think I followed up production of wealth. So I'm a capitalist. I run a business. We need to make money. It's that moment where how much is enough, I think, because people are choosing profits over people. What you're describing is where we need to aim for. And I'm hoping that balance is found, and the good organizations will see time and the world that you describe as that balance. And you can see people trying to get there with a 4-day week. Can we be as productive with a reduced amount of time? And we've trialed that in Inspiring Workplaces. We're on a 9-day fortnight. We've not quite got to the 4-day week. We haven't clawed that back, but AI might help us get there. So, I mean, like everything, it's probably my catchphrase this week. I wish we had more time to just explore this more with you. I genuinely just so absorbing, and I'd love to just delve into this more. So, but we have to press on, and maybe we will review how long we spend on the summer series each day. But maybe we have to go to 90 minutes next year. So, but thank you so much. Is there anything you want to a parting sentiment you want to leave with us?
Very briefly, just to follow on from what you just said, Matt. I think also it's about the quality of our work time, not the quantity. People always mix those two up, but I do think it's very important to remember that we can work more wisely and more creatively when we work less. And ultimately, the quality of our input is more important than just the quantity. And congratulations on going into the direction of a four-day work week. And please,
I completely agree. I mean, the Liz Fossline image, I totally agree with. If I eat well, sleep well, wake up, go to the gym, I will have done what I need to do that day by 10 a.m. and everything else is a bonus. But when I don't do it, I do armchair perfectionist. So, but thank you so much. I'm so sorry we have to move on so fast, but we will explore more ways of this content and speaking to you afterwards, if that's okay.
Of course.
Thank you so much, Anna. Take care.
Bye-bye.